Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Leading from Afar. I'm Scott Markovitz with my co-host Tevi Hershon. Tevi, how's it going today?
Doing good, Scott. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. Today we're going to continue our series on the hybrid remote model and the future of offices. We're excited today to be joined by David Cairns. David runs a special program that's part of CBRE, which is the largest commercial real estate company, I believe, in the world. CBRE Forward, his program, is focusing on the future of work and how offices play a part in that, if they do. So we'll dive into that through the conversation. So the way we normally start, David, is to introduce yourself, maybe tell us a little bit more about CBRE and tell us a little bit more about the Forward program, please.
Yeah, sure. No problem. Yeah, I'm Dave Cairns. I'm based in Toronto, Canada, and I do work for CBRE. And as you mentioned, we are the largest and I would argue the most sophisticated commercial real estate service firm in the world. I think we're at the pointy end of the spear on the future of work. As an example, we just made a 35% investment in Industrious, which is one of the leading workspace as a service operators out there. I think that's a big indication of where we believe in the future of work and it being a choice-led, more flexible and more service-oriented approach to leveraging commercial real estate. I'm very proud to work at CBRE. I am an office leasing broker. I predominantly focus on helping high growth companies, whether it be Series A startup companies or the likes of some of the larger tech firms like Salesforce, Indeed.com. I have a very holistic approach to helping companies with real estate requirements, not just in Toronto, but in a lot of major markets around the world. I also have a really close connection to the flex office sector, working with a number of providers in that sector. I'm a big believer in its future as well and its relevancy in a more decentralized or hybrid world where remote is very much a part of the future of work. With respect to CBRE Forward, CBRE Forward started as a platform to showcase the most innovative companies in Canada. Recently, it's migrated to a platform where we talk about targeted growth strategies with respect to real estate for high growth companies. And it's also become a place where we're talking about the future of work. We actually have an interview series as well called Moving Forward with a similar vein and intention as you guys have with this podcast. So that's me in a nutshell. I post a lot of content on LinkedIn, all on the future of office, so please check me out there.
Yeah, sure. We'll include that in the show notes. So thank you for sharing. You touched a bit on CBRE and your role in the future of work. What is your personal belief on the future of work? And now that so many companies have moved remote, where do you think they're going to be picking up after the pandemic is over? And how does CBRE fit into that future?
Yeah, so my belief is that the way we were using offices leading up to this pandemic was archaic and based on a world that no longer has really a lot of relevancy. So with that, I think that a light has been shone on the fact that the future of work is about choice for the end user or the employee, basically. I think it's going to be very complicated because it's not easy to create a workplace strategy to maintain and grow your culture in a way where you're considering the individual needs of people within your organization and how they want to work. But I just fundamentally believe there's really no turning back. So with respect to office space, I think we lived in a world where all aspects of what we did were, for the most part, done from the office. I'll give you a perfect example. I used to go to my office and perform most of my job from my phone sitting at a desk at CBRE. I could do that from anywhere. It's just not something that is required, and it almost doesn't make sense. Why am I going to this place 5 days a week to perform a job that I'm largely doing from my phone and actually has a lot of remote functionality to it in that I'm talking to customers that are not actually physically proximate to where I am. So that's a style of working that I think doesn't make sense. And most companies around the world now see that very clearly. They also see that they can measure the performance of their people from their actual output, not like by peering out of their office and seeing a bunch of heads looked at a computer screen. So that just fundamentally turns on its head what you would use an office for. At CBRE, we're really focused on trying to help companies understand what those activity-based reasons for working are, helping uncover what they are. And those could be still heads down tasks, right? It's not just about collaboration, but I think we're going to be moving into an era where typing emails at a computer screen is no longer the reason we use offices. We're going to be far more purpose oriented in the reasons we do it. It probably means for most companies that they're going to be doing it a little bit less, and that will range. Maybe some companies will be in the office 4 or 5 days a week, but I think it's pretty clear that there are a wide number of examples out there where this hybrid way of doing things is going to be more of a 2, 3, or 4 day equation, and then a complete rethinking or reimagining of what that space looks like, what it's designed to actually do for the end user, and how are we going to manage the demand through the week for that space with people now not migrating there along the same commuting patterns or trajectories.
Interesting. One of the last points that you had mentioned about the purpose of the office. From the companies that you're working with, what are you hearing so far? Tebby and I both are in agreement that the purpose of an office will no longer be about getting work done. It'll have nothing to do with work versus it'll be the place where you do team building and you do collaboration. So a place you can drop in, spend a couple hours, have a coffee with your colleagues. The return of the ping pong tables being something that helps with team engagement for that team building, that collaboration, and then you go home to do the actual work. For the companies that you're speaking with and for the experience that you have, what are you seeing? What are you feeling is the future purpose of the office? Yeah.
So it's funny that you bring up this idea of not working. It's one that I share that view. I think it's going to look different case by case, but I actually was on a tour with a client, this preliminary tour looking for a post-vaccine office a couple of weeks ago. And funny enough, one of the founders actually said, I really hope that when we kick this office off, not a lot of work will get done in this office. There was actually a little bit of a debate between two of the founders. One of the other founders was saying, I actually hope some work gets done. But I really resonated with what the one founder was saying, because I think it really connects in with what you're describing, which is, yeah, an office is really there to build or maintain or grow relationships with colleagues. And some of that will be actual work where you'll benefit from taking an asynchronously developed project to a point where it becomes synchronous and you're in the same room and you're really expanding on things that you've done away from one another. But really, I'm in the same boat as you. I believe that going into an office should really be about connecting with people. A lot of how the best work gets done is through having trusting teams and trusting relationships. When I think back on how I've grown my career, being in the office, the benefits that I had actually were all around those kind of things. And most of those activities, you couldn't correlate to a productivity outcome. You know what I mean? Like it was more in this intangible growth of relationships over time. So I'm definitely aligned with you on that. I know a lot of my customers are as well. But I think I think a lot of these customers are also very focused on this activity-based way of working. Great companies have been performing lots of employee surveying over the last year, trying to understand not only how many days do they want to be there, but what are the activities that are best performed at work. It's so unique company to company, but I think it's going to range between all these different styles of collaboration, like whether it's like just purely to hang out or also to perform specific collaboration-based tasks, or all kinds of more deep and methodical work that yeah, you can do from home, but if you really created an amazing environment that's 100 times better than being at home, there's probably reasons why people would actually want to migrate to an office to go and do some really thoughtful, heads down, contemplative work. And then I think there still is a need for some assigned or unassigned seating within these offices, even though I think there's a migration to like there needing to be a purpose to be there, and maybe that purpose is not to work, but there's some kind of like purpose. It's not just because. There still does seem to be some percentage of employees within every organization that I'm talking to that just don't have great work from home setups. Even if their company were to give them money to spend on a chair or whatever, they've got a Manhattan view at their apartment and they just would prefer to, work from an office. So I think on a given day, there was a significant number of staff sitting at a desk typing emails. That number is going to go way down. There still will be some kind of need for it. And then I think every single company is a hell of a lot more focused on space utilization than they ever were. I think they all recognize that the optimization of the way they were using their space was like 50% of whatever its possible output could have been. So I think that there's also just a big focus on how utilization can be better solved for to save money, to make less of an impact on the environment, whatever the case may be. I think companies are really focused on that as well.
The purpose is going to have to match with the design. So if there's a new purpose of why we're going to the office, the design of the office has to change. The old open office layout with endless desks never worked. All the data says that it doesn't work. This is going to be a version 3, a redesign. What would that version 3 of Office look like?
I think before I make any comments, again, it's just there's no one answer to this question, obviously. But I can give you an example. I'm working with a company right now that prior to COVID felt that once they raised a Series A financing round, that they would need something like 10 to 12,000 square feet of space. Now they feel that they need somewhere between 6 to 8,000 square feet of space under the presumption that there will not be ever the same amount of occupancy on a given day. So for one, space requirements seem to be shrinking. That's one thing. And then where before they would have had quite a lot of open desks in the space, that's thrown out the window. And I think the idea with this particular company is that they see a need for, call it 3 or 4 team-based collaboration rooms where a team of, let's call it 5 or 10 people within the organization need to come together and do particular things on a given day. I think they understand that there might be pods within their organization that need space to collaborate with one another. Like not everyone in the company is focused on the same activities. So there's this intentional thought process behind creating larger team-based rooms. Whereas I think before you would have seen mostly open concept phone booths and then more like 4-person meeting rooms. I'm seeing this company have less of a focus on the 4-person meeting room and maybe larger team-based rooms. They're really focused on enhancing the kitchen area or lounge space, like various forms of lounge space throughout. So whether or not all these spaces are enclosed or think of them as little lounge alcoves that are far more intentional with the furniture settings, that they're intended to evoke a specific feeling or a particular style of working. I'm seeing a lot of that thought process as well. To your point earlier, I think that companies are really looking at their office as being a place where their people really can build on their relationships with one another. These days that they get together will be cherished days because they won't be happening with the same amount of frequency. So I think a lot of the office may open plans still, but it will be curated with a lot more intentionality in terms of what that specific space is really intended for. I don't know how familiar you guys are with Convene out of New York City, but if you ever walk into a Convene, they're a flex office space provider and also an event and meeting space provider. They have both of those products that they offer on an on-demand basis. When you walk into a Convene, what you are intended to be doing, thinking, and feeling from any given space within their footprint. In other words, everything about it is extremely intentional, whether it's the furniture or the service that's provided by Convene as the hospitality operator. So I think that's where we're headed, far more intentionality, but it still might be open plan, just done differently.
I'm not familiar with Convene, but how does that compare with WeWork?
Convene would definitely be different from a number of perspectives. One, they're more focused on events and meetings, and then flex workspace for larger teams. WeWork was always known to have a really high density model. They were putting a lot of people into the space with less of a focus on amenities. If you were to walk into a WeWork, it would probably be no more than 10 or 15% of the floor that was dedicated to meeting space, collaboration space, cafes. With Convene, they charged more. And so by virtue of charging more, they had the ability to like make more of the space an amenity as opposed to this focus on a lot of people inside of the space. So that's probably the best way of correlating it.
Got it. Makes sense. So you mentioned how companies are rethinking how much space they need and how they're going to be more about the space that they have. Do you think companies will try to get a little bit more distributed? Are they going to stick with one central HQ or might they break up into smaller satellite offices in the future?
That's a great question. I think in the short term, we're going to see with the majority of companies that they actually shrink their HQ and still they don't actually get a distributed office strategy right out of the gate. They focus more on just work from home and a smaller HQ. I think the reason for this is more that the product side, the supply side, the office world just isn't ready. In other words, the marketplaces that can allow for an end user to load up their phone and find a workspace for the day in some sort of niche co-working space or spaces like the one that I'm in right now, that technology and the supply of what's available hasn't really reached the critical scale that I think it will in the next 3 to 5 years. There's a lot of talk actually on LinkedIn right now about how there's tons of flexible office space options out there in major cities around the world. The challenge for organizations is that they can't easily access and search for it. And so we need to see the growth of the market makers. And there are a number of them out there. I'm advising one of them that's Toronto based called FlexDay. They're trying to do a number of different things. They're helping co-working companies with their own rent issues. If you have a hot desk in a co-working space that doesn't get rented, you never get that revenue back. It's like a nightly hotel rental. So they're always looking for providers that can help them with the demand for their own space. And then on the flip side, though, what's going to be possible, I think, in the next couple of years for companies of all shapes and sizes is that they can log into FlexDay, pay a monthly membership to be part of FlexDay, and then give employees, let's call it 10 credits a month or however many they choose based on the working style of the organization to allow those employees to actually load up FlexDay on a Tuesday and be like, okay, I'm seeing a client in the Junction, which is where I live in Toronto. I need a flexible office space to go to after this meeting that I'm having. Boom, I load it up and use one of my credits. Or I'm working remotely, but I don't want to work in my house. Boom, I load up a credit and I go to a place near my house. This is coming. It's just, so most companies just aren't aware, or it's not even something that's easily facilitated. So I think it's just going to be smaller HQ and home for the next little while until the market changes, if that makes sense.
That sounds really cool. Are people working on that tech?
Oh yeah, for sure. There's some really amazing companies out there. FlexDay is one of them. Another company called Upflex is another. Liquid Space. There's a whole host of companies out there that are essentially trying to be the market makers for this work from anywhere movement that's going on. I don't know if you guys have heard some of the recent news. Companies like Standard Chartered Bank have negotiated a deal with IWG, which is the parent company of Regis and Spaces, whereby their 85,000 employees are going to be able to access 3,300 or more IWG locations. Those examples are a leading indicator of a movement towards working from anywhere. And I think that the more companies that announce their desire to do this, whether it's Spotify, Revolut, Standard Chartered, the list really is starting to grow and grow. With more of the companies making these announcements, I think you'll see more landlords recognizing that they need this kind of footprint within their portfolios. In turn, I think that we'll see the leader emerge in the market making category, like the equivalent of Airbnb, just to simplify it. I think we'll start to see a couple of leaders come out in that category, what companies will be able to do to help their employees work from really anywhere.
Very cool.
Interesting. The idea with the flex space, and David, please correct me if I'm wrong, is it still requires either the flex company to build and design a flexible space or potentially to sublease a space that exists out there. One of the thoughts that I've had for maybe the biggest opportunity is the ability to repurpose unused space. So bars that are closed during the day, libraries that aren't used. How does potentially repurposing this unused space affect the future of office space?
Yeah, so it's interesting. There was a few players that were out there trying to do this. FlexDay in Toronto was actually one of them, where they were going to restaurateurs and saying, hey, we can help you generate some revenue from the hours of 9 to 5. There was another company based out of New York City that WeWork acquired. I'm forgetting their name. For some reason, getting in there with the actual restaurants and the libraries and whatever, the wind seemed to get blown out of those sails. FlexDay moved on from it. I don't know that the company that WeWork acquired is operational anymore. But what I do think will emerge is basically what I would call retail storefront facing flex office space offerings. There's quite a number of operators out there that are trying to bring this type of concept to the street front, to the neighborhood. The idea of it being like a bridge between the office that I'm in right now that I've rented for 1 year and a Starbucks, right? Like Starbucks is the place you go to and hope to have a seat, and you'd work there for as long as someone will let you. There's a growing category of flex office where it's at the street front level. You can pay for it by the minute, by the hour, and use it truly in an on-demand way. I think that category will also really grow over the next decade as part of the flex office movement. I don't know, but it will be interesting to see if there are players that continue to try and help figure out that space utilization issue. I just noticed it lost a little bit of its wind recently.
To the recent point, I have a good friend here in Israel who had a similar business of using bars that weren't used during the day and repurposing them. Similarly, he got some traction, but it seems like those perhaps are before its time. And obviously now through COVID, the idea of maybe being there wasn't as many people looking to work remotely, or that if you had the option to work from a bar, which wasn't designed to have beautiful couches and craft coffee, or go work at a WeWork space, we'll probably tend to go for the WeWork space. But maybe now, as we're moving forward and the opportunity to repurpose some of these spaces and design them a little bit more beautifully.
One of my favorite people in commercial real estate, his name is Dror Poleg. If you don't follow Dror and you're listening to this, follow Dror. He made a quote, which I'll try to paraphrase. He said something like, the internet is not going to stop people from living and working in cities, just like it didn't stop them from listening to music or watching movies. But it will dramatically change where and how people work in cities and live. So what I think is just really going to fundamentally change is that even if you can walk to your company's headquarters within 15 or 20 minutes, like in Toronto, we have an entertainment district that is literally 15 or 20 minutes walk to the financial core. I personally think we'll see more of these flex spaces pop up at the street front, pop up at the base of condominiums, also find their way into office projects that are in more local neighborhoods. And people are going to want to work potentially outside of their home if they've got like a 500 square foot apartment or whatever it is, or they just want to change the scenery. But I don't think there's necessary talking about how people will live and work in different ways. I don't believe that people will go to their company's headquarters with the same level of frequency, even if it's a 20-minute walk away, because they're not going to feel that obligation. They're not going to feel that, oh God, what if my employer thinks if I'm not there 5 days a week, then I'm not really doing my job. Like that's starting to be thrown completely out the window. But it doesn't mean that people don't want to leave their house and work in different spaces. It just doesn't necessarily mean it's the company's headquarters all the time.
Yeah, I guess I could see a future where there's a phone booth or something on every corner like they used to be, but now there's no phone in there. There's just an internet connection, a mini Wi-Fi or something. Pop into wherever they want. That could be really interesting.
I find it wild. Offices were created because of technology. We created typewriters and all of this technology that required physical proximity and a lot of space. But now, ironically, technology, where it brought us together, it's actually now creating dispersion. And I think that's something that the real estate industry really needs to acknowledge as a fundamental truth. We should not resist the fact that the same technology that justified building 1 million office towers may now completely decentralize the way that we all interact and make communication increasingly more asynchronous. And that's how the building needs to be contemplated. That's how the office space needs to be contemplated, as this cherished, sacred space to perform something specific. And it doesn't have to be work. I might come down to the office because Amazon's paying for a spa that I get to go to. There's got to be more intentionality around why we're going to offices, is the bottom line, whatever it is.
So I guess to that end, you're in the commercial real estate business. Has the pandemic helped or hurt CBRE?
Look, revenues are down for office, right? Whoever's in the industrial world right now is doing just fine. That's been booming through the pandemic. But obviously retail and office have definitely been hit. As a broker myself, we've been doing a lot of transactions, but the transactions are like short in duration, like just kick the can down the road kind of deal that most companies are doing. But I really do feel for the real estate brokers out there that don't have larger enterprise clients and have mostly been working with, let's say, a small and medium-sized business. Those companies are all trying to sublet their space. Many of them are dramatically downsizing their real estate requirements. It's been tough. I think in the long run, you can't stop this freight train. This is an inflection point in the way that humanity works, and inflection points are unavoidable. Will there be a bigger gap between winners and losers in the world of commercial real estate over the next decade? I absolutely think the answer to that question is yes. I think it's going to be more competitive as a real estate broker to make a living. I think that there will be certain buildings and certain landlords that just don't perform and don't move into the next generation how they need to be thinking about their product and more importantly their service, the service that they actually provide not only to the company that's renting the office space but to the end users of that building that walk through the door. I think the gap between winners and losers is going to be greater, but for those that lean into the future, I think that the money making potential will be huge, absolutely huge. But there's just not, you can't deny these realities, right? You can't deny the inherent benefit of less commuting, right? People commuting less is just better for the environment. Companies are going to be focused on that. Companies are going to be focused on trying to save money because they recognize that less office space is ultimately required for their workforce to remain productive. I think you would be naive to say don't exist if you're in the world of commercial real estate and servicing it or supplying it.
The teams and the companies that you've been working with that are actually looking at the future of the offices and how it's going to be redesigned, are they more looking it's going to be a redesigned office that is going to be used 5 days a week, the kind of old 9 to 5, or is it that place where people come in for 2 days a week or 3 days a week or something more flexible or not that full-time 9 to 5, 5 days a week?
You just lobbed one in there for me. The answer is definitely not 9 to 5, 5 days a week. In fact, I think Salesforce was quoted as saying 9 to 5 life is over. There's some companies that I think are going to be the minority that go back to this old way of working 9 to 5. And honestly, whether they end up dying a slow or fast death, they're going to die some form of death because why would anybody want to go back to an archaic way of working that literally just makes no sense? Yeah. So yeah, anyone that I'm working with, and I pride myself in working with forward-thinking, employee-centric organizations, they are all planning for less days in the office and they are planning for a complete redesign. For some organizations, they may elect to actually get in there and redesign their existing layouts because they've got long-term lease obligations and they feel that the space from a size point of view and a location point of view, it works. It's just the layout that doesn't work. Some organizations will do that, but I think many will wait until they no longer have a lease obligation and they'll completely rethink the way that they do things. I think it's going to equate to downsizing in a lot of cases. It will equate to decentralization in some cases for those that are able to facilitate a work from anywhere strategy when the market hasn't gotten itself to a point where it's just more seamless. But any way you slice it, it's less days in the office, it's likely less office space, and it's redesigned office space.
Awesome. So I guess the last question for you, David, is with the downsizing and distributed nature of offices coming, who wins more, company finances or employee productivity?
So your question is the balance sheet of the organization the ultimate winner, or is the employee the ultimate winner? Is that what you're asking?
Yep.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it really boils down to the culture of the organization, right? I'm sure there are some companies out there that are just looking at this as like a cash grabbing opportunity to downsize and aren't really actually thinking about their people. But then there are others that are laser focused on it. Spotify is a great example. They've told their staff that they can literally work from anywhere. And they will support that in one way, shape, or form, inclusive of co-working memberships for those that don't want to come back to an office but want some kind of productivity space outside. They'll give people money for improving their work from home setup. They still are going to have offices in their main hubs, blah, blah, blah. Those kinds of organizations are really thinking about their people. They're not even suggesting that they'll reduce salaries if people move from those key markets. So that's an example of a very employee-centric organization that I think will save money, but isn't doing it for the cost savings. And then there's going to be others that are like purely looking to downsize to save money.
I'm interested in the ones that are very employee centric. How do they, if they're even interested, reallocate that money savings on the office? Let's say each employee costs $1,500 a month for the coffee, for the food, and for the space that delivered to the door for an employee. Do you send them snack packages in the mail, or do you repurpose some of that money that is going to be saved by no more office, and the companies are going to take that forward thinking, saying, wow, we've saved a whole heck of a lot of money. Can we put some of this money back on those incentives, what was used to bring people to an office, and still incentivize them in some way staying from home?
No, absolutely. And absolutely. Look, real estate is the second largest cost for every organization, essentially. But it still pales in comparison to the cost of salaries. So hopefully, a lot of companies are just thinking about a reallocation of those funds, not necessarily trying to take every dollar and add it to the bottom line.
Awesome. It was great to hear, especially for someone in the corporate real estate space, the forward thinking that's already going on within that arena of how to repurpose, redesign, and rethink the future of offices, the future of corporate space. So we greatly appreciate the time spent and all the great information shared. We'll be sure to include your LinkedIn profile and other profiles in the show notes. Ted, any last questions?
No, thank you so much, David. It was great to meet you.
Yeah, thank you guys. Really appreciated the conversation.
Until the next episode, have a great day.